We're in the age of collapse. The probability is just going through the roof. Our country is very well set for civil war. You've got the let's assassinate CEOs of big firms, let's burn down the Tesla factories. There'll be no food distribution. We'll have an immediate collapse. Economy's not functioning, widespread loss of law and order. Your biggest enemy could be your neighbor. An electric grid is probably the Achilles heel of the United States. The FBI estimates Chinese have safe houses in every state in the U.S. They have at least 1,000 agents over here where they can do sabotage from the inside. If you take down the electric grid, you've just disabled the U.S. military. Pandemic is inevitable. We're going to have them either from natural mutations or deliberate bioattacks. We now have H5N1 spreading in mammal populations all over the world. What's the likelihood that that leads to a collapse? It is definitely not low. And our government is not preparing for us. They're just planning to steal from us if they're necessary. There's nothing worse than the U.S. government when it comes to disgraceful, irresponsible performance and making us not just unprepared for a collapse, but set up to die.
World War III is already happening.
This is a house of cards, and it is in the process of collapsing right now.
You're going to see an economic crash, the likes of which we've never seen.
Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. Today on the channel, it's an honor to have Dr. Drew Miller, a former USAF colonel with a distinguished military and academic background, including an honor graduate from the USAF Academy and advanced degrees from Harvard University, including a PhD in public policy. He also served in Bosnia and Iraq, and he also has a project called Fortitude Ranch, which is a kind of sort of prepper commune, but it's unique in a lot of respects. So I hope to get his take on that today. In a recent model that you had of a probability of collapse model, I think here, that is utilizing simulation apps. The probability of collapse model estimates a 16 to 57% chance of collapse. How was this number calculated, and which trigger events concern you the most at this point in time?
Well, first, Nate, thank you for having me on your show. It's an honor. I've been watching you for years, so it's fun to finally be on a video with you.
Oh.
And I was an intelligence officer in the military, and so we're often trying to estimate what's the probability we're going to get into war with country X. And for a collapse, we do a similar approach. For this model, it's a probability of collapse model. I developed it about a decade ago and presented it to the Military Operations Research Society, their operations research experts, presented it there, and then last year we updated it. And so we got input from 23 intelligence officers, defense analysts, biologists, scientists, people who are aware of the different, we call them trigger events, something that could start a collapse. So, you need to talk to biologists if you're worried about an H5N1 pandemic, which I definitely am. And so we put them all in, and you for some things like asteroid strikes or something like that, we've got statistical data. What's the probability we're going to have a super volcano eruption? And as you know, we've had, the estimate is 5 to 6 collapse events already in the planet's history where most species were wiped out. And that's largely asteroid hits and supervolcano eruptions. So there you've got probability data. So we've got an actual number we can use. But for most things like what's the probability of an H5N1 pandemic, biologists will tell you it's inevitable. It's going to happen. When is it going to happen? We don't know. So, but they can estimate it. And so what we do is we ask for a range of estimates from all these experts, and then we average them together, do some other modifications. But it's a little bit more complicated. It's a two-stage process. First of all, the question is, what's the likelihood that this trigger event is going to happen, that we have an H5N1 pandemic? And then the second question is, what's the likelihood that that leads to a collapse? So, for example, you could have an asteroid strike, but it doesn't lead to a winter event that blocks sunlight and wipes out crops. So just because the trigger event happens doesn't mean you get to collapse. So it's a two-stage model, a lot of numbers collected and then put together. And then there's a range of estimates. I can't tell you the probability that Chinese agents will use drones and the 1,000 Chinese agents, at least, they've got in the U.S. and cyber attacks to take down the electric grid. What's the probability of that? We put in a range of estimates, And then that's how we come up with models. So that's why the answer was 16 to 57% annual probability of collapse. It's highly uncertain. But the thing is, it is definitely not low. I mean, in the low end, there's a 16% chance we'll have a collapse from one of different. We tracked over 50 trigger events that are in this model. And then it's, it could be up to 67% is our estimate. So we are going to have collapse. I have a video out called The Age of Collapse where I talk about a lot of these different trigger events and what's going to happen. But the probability is just going through the roof. If I'm droning on, you can stop me, but there's kind of 6 things driving this trend.
Floor is all yours. So just don't be worried about droning on at all.
Okay. Well, we see 6 trends, and the number one and the worst thing is new technologies. Because it's nowadays, I mean, an individual can modify H5N1. Our government, the US government funded gain of function research, had success making avian flu, bird flu, H5N1, transmissible between ferrets, mammals. Not only did our government fund this research, they didn't block the publication. The research was published after they were successful on how they did it. That was about a decade ago. Well, flash forward to today, we now have H5N1 spreading in mammal populations all over the world. Whether or not it was from this research or not, I don't know. But I can tell you, biologists will tell you either that naturally H5N1 will keep mutating towards human transmissible, are more likely, and here I'm quoting the former director of the Center for Disease Control, an expert, he thinks it's going to be a deliberate pandemic where Iran does this, or some lunatic Unabomber type person who thinks, hey, there's too many people, we got to save the planet by releasing a virus.
The 12 monkeys scenario.
Yeah, they think that's going to happen. Yeah. So a pandemic is very high on the list. And then for the US, our electric grid is so horribly vulnerable. If you haven't seen the documentary Grid Down, Power Up, professional documentary produced, it outlines, yep. You know the 5 ways to take down the grid. Well, so does North Korea. North Korea, with their tiny little nuclear force, not accurate, has the ability to take out the US electric grid whenever they want. So there's just all these ways to happen. So 16, I think it's probably closer to 57% annual chance.
Yeah, I was going to say they don't even have to use an EMP. They can just take out a few select transformers. And according to that documentary anyways, you only need to take down a handful of transformers to actually compromise the entire grid. Interesting that you talk about H5N1 as being top of mind. One of the videos that I came across in doing some research for this interview was an interview you did with Fox News, I think maybe 7 or 8 years ago. And this is before the pandemic, obviously. And you were saying in that interview that you thought that a pandemic would be, one of the most likely outcomes. But it was interesting how the Fox News host was seemingly being very condescending and kind of snickering and, really making light of what you were saying. And, I'm not sure if you've ever revisited that interview since, but, you pretty much hit the nail on the head there. And I don't think it's incredible the shift in attitude towards preparedness since the time you did that interview, because right now nobody would be laughing at what you're saying.
Right.
Or at least nobody with brains.
That's before COVID. And by the way, for a long time, they said, the NIH didn't give any funding to Wuhan. That's not true. We did do gain of function research dollars that the US government gave to the Wuhan Institute before the COVID-19 pandemic. Did it cause it or not? I don't know. The intelligence community is split on that, as you probably know in the reports. But a pandemic is inevitable. We're going to have them either from natural mutations or deliberate bioattacks. I believe, like the former Center CDC director, that the virus is going to be introduced. Because if you want to take out the U.S. from supporting Ukraine, for example, Russia could release an H5N1 virus over here. Would it spread to Russia? Probably, but very slowly. And before they release the virus, they could develop a vaccine and produce it before they release it. So that's a big risk. An electric grid is probably the Achilles heel of the United States. So the FBI estimates, the FBI has said Chinese have safe houses in every state in the US. They have at least 1,000 agents over here. Some of them are probably already placed, have jobs in utility companies where they can do sabotage from the inside. They've got agents who can do physical attacks. You're probably familiar with the Metcalf substation attack in California years ago, which was professionally done. Anyone who looks at the reports on it reaches the same conclusion. This is a dress rehearsal. This is a practice attack to shoot up a substation and destroy the transformer. How long does it take? Do you get detected? Professionally done. Was it Russian agents? Was it Korean, North Korean? Was it Chinese? We don't know that. We never caught the people. But China could take out our grid with physical attacks, as you pointed out, not just with a nuclear high altitude EMP detonation. And then they could also use drones. The drone activity that we've seen that's alarmed people over the US, yes, there were a lot of false reports in there, people reporting aircraft and normal commercial drones. But the drone activity, the surveillance over Langley Air Force Base for 17 days was not some commercial guy with the drone. That was an enemy nation state doing surveillance. And then a lot of the activity in northern New Jersey, the FAA put out a notice saying you can no longer fly drones over electric substations because it looked like they were mapping out, plotting drone routes to take out electric grid stations. And my belief is that Chinese agents are working in Chinese air taxi drone companies. The Chinese are the leaders in drones for taxis. And these are large drones that could release hundreds or more of smaller drones that could spread out, cover, maybe 100 miles or so, land with their small drone with the small physical explosive charge inside a transformer, blows up, takes out that transformer. And it's worse than that because when that transformer blows up, there's a good chance it'll send a jolt of electricity down the power line, might take out another transformer. That's why we had this electricity event that's your fault up there in Canada, a lightning strike in Canada. This is over a decade ago, Ontario, I believe. And they're part of our grid that connected. Lightning strike hit in Ontario and a power jolt came through into the Northeast US and it kept spreading and took down a big part of the electric grid in the Northeast US. So the electric grid is very vulnerable. Why would you want to take down the electric grid if you're China? Well, if you're going to invade Taiwan, if you take down the electric grid, you've just disabled the US military. Yes, naval forces deployed at sea can operate, but there is no separate military electric grid. We use the civilian grid. You take down the electric grid, and a congressionally funded study by experts said you take down the U.S. electric grid, anywhere up to 90% of the U.S. population will die. So you can kill off 90% of Americans, and you can absolutely immediately disable our conventional military power by taking down the U.S. electric grid. And China could do that. We'd not be able to prove it was them. If they did the attack with cyber, physical agents shooting up transformers, and then drone attacks on transformers, and then agents and utility companies doing sabotage. And I think that's what they're likely to do. My guess is the Taiwan war, if they get to that, and President Xi has made it absolutely clear he wants Taiwan back before he leaves office. And it's going to be the least surprise war in history. The Chinese have been saying for over 50 years, it's our civil war, it's our island, we're taking it back. So when they do that, if they take out our electric grid, they'll have no trouble forcing Taiwan to submit, probably without an invasion. U.S. won't be able to oppose it, and we'll be doing everything they can to try to stay alive.
All right, guys. So as some of you know, Canadian Prepper is a fully independent channel. We don't have sponsors and we're beholden to nobody. You can help support us by supporting yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com. I know that in an emergency, having the right gear can make all the difference. This is why I've tested and curated the best preparedness products on the market so that you can be confident and ready for whatever comes your way. Now, back to the video. So just to go back to something you said about H5N1, and we're kind of bouncing in between two different scenarios, but they're all ultimately interconnected because there's a biowarfare with H5N1 potentially, and then there's the grid down, which could potentially be a multi-pronged attack. With respect to the H5N1, my only observation to share with that is that, what recently happened in 2020, I think our adversaries seen what happened in the United States versus what happened in China. What happened in China? People locked down. They complied with the government orders. It was immediate. It was swift. Everybody, for at least a few years, perfectly complied with the mandate. Whereas in the United States, it created all kinds of civil unrest. Now, I can only imagine the civil divide that exists today being amplified by another biowarfare event. And it would be incredibly disadvantageous to the open book, glasshouse, Western democracies in the sense that there's going to be all kinds of differences of opinion when it comes to who caused it. And I mean, you know how the whole thing is going to go. There's going to be people who don't want to take the intervention. There's going to be people who really do, and people who are, aggressively wanting to crack down. And this is something which you're not going to have that disharmony in other societies where they're more, uniform, they're more compliant, authoritarian regimes. Do you have any thoughts on that? And because I think even though it's one of those things where you don't want to release a biological agent because ultimately it's going to affect you also, but maybe as we've seen with the Wuhan flu, it affected the U.S. more than it did China. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with that, Nate. And again, COVID-19 was less than 1% lethal. So it's a good virus to practice with. H5N1, if a human gets it, it's 50 to 60% lethal. There's different variants, but the one they would release as an agent would be probably 50 to 60% lethal. And when that happens, it's game over. No one's going to go to work. It's not going to be COVID-19. There'll be no food distribution. We'll have an immediate collapse. Economy's not functioning, widespread loss of law and order. You've got a picture of Fortitude Ranch, West Virginia up there, but Fortitude Ranch, we're a survival community. We were designed with pandemics in mind. So, for example, we have lots of little buildings. It's not like we're all in one shelter underground sharing an air supply, because we're going to have pandemics, and I don't want to share an air supply. I don't care how great you think your filter is. If I was in the same room and I coughed on you, there's some viruses where they've demonstrated that it takes like five virus particles is all it takes to infect you. If I sneeze on you, I'm sending hundreds to thousands of virus particles into your face. So we were designed to be spread out for pandemic defense, so we're not all in the same place. And then we're also spread out because you got to be able to protect yourself on the surface, because there will be marauders in an H5N1 pandemic, any disaster, because there'll be no food distribution. People are going to start starving immediately, or start going for food immediately because they're going to be afraid about starvation. And you got to be able to protect yourself. That's why we designed Fortitude Ranch to do that. We've run a lot of scenarios. I mean, you do a lot of great educational videos on your show, but most people aren't watching the preparedness videos, aren't getting ready. That's why we launched our Collapse Survivor app, because it offers training. We put videos on there. We've got some of your videos on our program. And then we do training simulations where people get put into situations where a pandemic has started. What do you want to do? The classic almost initial question is, do I want to bug out? Do I stay put if I'm in a city or suburb, or do I leave? You got to make decisions like that. And then you got to deal with, as the collapse develops, deal with running out of food, deal with marauder threats, deal with finding waters, all the skills that you train people on. But the vast majority of Americans, and we're more prepper oriented than most of the rest of the world, they're just not prepared for. So we're trying to get people to think about it, to watch programs like yours to get educated. And the Collapse Survivor app was designed to have something on your phone where you can see videos like the ones that Canadian Prepper puts out, and others, to get educated. And then we do training simulations as well. And then we do threat alerts too. So we put out a lot of alerts on how H5N1 is slowly spreading in more and more mammal populations, adapting, and it is going to be a human-to-human contagious virus. And when that comes, my bet is it'll be the most deadly experience our species have ever had. Biologists estimate that the virus may kill 1 billion people, but you and I know it's going to kill more than that if the collapse lasts for over a year. We all know about not all of us, but preppers like us, we know about the Spanish flu. And it's really badly misnamed. First of all, it's not the Spanish flu. It started in the US and Kansas. And secondly, it's not the 1918 pandemic. It lasted for almost 2 years. Pandemics aren't short. They're going to last for a long time. So you've got 2 years of needing to either use your stockpiled food, or Fortitude Ranch, we grow food. and ranch. So you need to be able to be prepared for a really long time when a pandemic hits. If the grid goes down, you're talking about well over a year if the U.S. electric grid is destroyed. Well over a year. That's best case.
In that scenario, too, where there is a high fatality rate, here during the COVID pandemic, people could still go to the grocery store and confidently know that there's a very low risk of not only exposure, but potentially getting some debilitating illness. In that scenario where there is, even if it's 10% fatality rate, I mean, 50 to 60 is kind of, it's very unlikely, I think, that you're going to have that sustained transmission. I mean, it's possible, but even if it's a 10% fatality rate, most people aren't going to want to risk. So even if the supply chain is still somewhat functional, you're likely not going to want to risk it under those circumstances.
Absolutely right.
Do you have any thoughts, though, because I know you've recently talked a lot about the potential for civil unrest, and part of the reason why we connected was to talk about what we're seeing unfold in the U.S. And for myself personally, I think the only way that the U.S. is defeated is if it defeats itself. And I think our adversaries realize that. I mean, separated by two oceans. Okay. So what do you do to exacerbate those tensions? Well, a virus would probably do that, or anything that really created more economic uncertainty. All of these things are going to factor in. But how do you think your the H5N1 scenario would exacerbate these tensions? Because I suspect, I mean, we're getting to the realm of speculation, I suppose, but I suspect that you're going to have a big divide in terms of what we've seen during COVID, but amplified even more.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a really low fatality rate and then some people aren't convinced I need to get vaccinated or get a mask, then you'd have that divide. But again, I agree with you, if it's even 10%, if it's any double-digit lethality rate, no one's going to go to work. I mean, police, I'm not blaming police. If I was a policeman, I would not go to work if there's a 10% lethal virus, because not only am I risking my life, but I could catch the virus depending on the incubation period, bring it home, kill my family off from them catching the virus from me. So police aren't going to go to work either. So yeah, law and order will break down. You're going to have a collapse in an H5N1 situation. And for civil war, I mean, our country is very well divided. And we asked, and recently we did a poll of preppers, and we asked, and again, we polled preppers because preppers watch your shows. They're looking for threats, possibility of a war, a pandemic, all these trigger events. Most Americans and most people just don't want to think about that stuff, but preppers do. So we polled them and said, what do you think are likely sources of collapse? And then we specifically, because we just did this recently, we asked them a question, and I'll read it to you. Do you believe that President Trump's actions and plans to date are increasing or decreasing the likelihood of domestic civil war? 50% said Trump is greatly increasing the likelihood of civil war because the divisions are getting worse on social and political grounds. Another 20% said he's slightly increasing the likelihood of civil war. And then 7% responded that he's not changing the likelihood of a civil war, but a domestic civil war is likely. So combined, 77% of the preppers we polled, several hundred responded in our poll, believe Trump is increasing the likelihood of civil war or that a domestic civil war is likely. So our country is split. We dodged a bullet with the election, as you know, because if Trump had lost, I think you could have had a civil war right then and there, because they were prepared, not to accept the election results. So we dodged that bullet, but still you have the problem that the country is divided and the divisions are getting worse. The guy named Ray Dalio, he founded Bridgewater, one of the biggest, most successful hedge funds ever. He's probably one of the smartest persons alive today. Ray Dalio has estimated that the likelihood of a U.S. civil war is greater than 50%. So, he's not a prepper. It's not you or me saying, hey, we face a high likelihood of civil war. It's an expert. But he makes his fortune as a hedge fund manager because he's predicting future events accurately.
I think he's probably more of a prepper than he lets on to.
Yeah, well, I don't know if he does. He probably does. I mean, most preppers, first rule of prepping, don't tell him when you're a prepper. You wouldn't know if he is. But, you and I are familiar with the tech executives, Zuckerberg with his huge Hawaii facility, Peter Thiel's going to New Zealand for his survival place. I mean, there was some data out on that a couple of years ago showing how high-tech executives are absolutely preparing, most of them building their own private, huge bunker complexes. And that's why we got survival. That's why we've got, Fortitude Ranch, because we want middle-class folks like, you and me with our income level to be able to survive too. So, we don't have fancy facilities. They're pretty simple. But when you get 100 plus people together at a survival community and you're sharing the cost, you got a professional staff, someone in uniform like me, most with a military background running it, it can be affordable for middle class folks. And then we're also a recreational facility. So our members can vacation at a Fortitude Ranch for up to 2 weeks a year. So instead of spending $3,000 to rent a cabin in the Colorado Rocky Mountains for your vacation, save that money, stay at Fortitude Ranch, Colorado. You can stay there for free for a week and then use that money to pay for your Fortitude Ranch membership. That's kind of our model.
There's all kinds of a potential knock-on effects with respect to what might happen in a civil unrest situation. In terms of, so maybe getting more specific with respect to the Trump effect as it pertains to civil unrest, because I think, like you said, most people would have thought that we had dodged a bullet and tensions have somewhat diffused since the election. But on the same token, it almost seems like I don't think it's intentional necessarily, but there definitely is an overcorrection possibly taking place, or that's what it will be perceived to be, in that there's going to be like an authoritarian backlash if and when the next administration comes in. Like, it just seems like it's intensifying each time. So now, of course, Elon Musk and Doge and Trump are making these fairly drastic changes, at least with respect to domestic policy, not so much on the foreign front. But it seems as though this is only going to exacerbate tensions even more. And what do the targeted attacks on Tesla represent in this whole analysis that you have? Like, because on the one hand, these are, just unorganized groups who are doing these things, people keying cars. But
well, they were organized a couple days ago. I mean, they had protests at Tesla events all over the U.S.
I was just going to say there's probably an organized component to this. But how does this all factor into your analysis? Because I think this could be a potential inflection point.
This could be the trigger event of a civil war. It could be the civil war has started. So you see the attacks on Tesla and then big protests at his place. But, that assassination attempt, the poll data, again, you try to cite data when you can see it. The poll data out on that guy who murdered a CEO in New York City, 41% of young American voters, so these are more responsible young folks, 41% said they approve of that was acceptable. That's another indication that, to some degree, our country is very well set for civil war. Now, how are they going to play out? I mean, that's speculation, but that's why we run these, that's why we run these simulations on collapse trial. We've done 2 different civil war scenarios. We did them last year. In the first one, Trump lost the election and his supporters wouldn't accept it, and the U.S. got into civil war. In the second scenario, Trump won. But we still got into civil war. It was a very different civil war. In that one, so let me go back to, so if Trump would have lost, I'm in Texas. I think Texas would have succeeded. There's a big Texas movement, a secession movement. It's got a lot of support. And if Biden had won, Biden, Harris had won, Trump had won re-election, there's a good chance Texas would say, we're out of here. They would have succeeded. Well, when Trump won, what happens is California started talking about succession. They didn't go forward with it, but what happened is The rural conservative counties in California, largely Northern California, they said we're succeeding, we're breaking up. And that's what happened in the collapse survivor simulation we ran is rural counties said, screw you, California, take your gun control laws and shove them into an appropriate place. We're going to not allow any of your state officials in our counties. We're not going to follow your laws that we think violate our natural rights protected under the Ninth Amendment. And we're going to form the state of Jefferson. And, you know, most of this stuff we don't make up in the collapse survivor app. There is a big state of Jefferson succession movement in California. And so that's one of the ways that a civil war could develop in the US. I mean, there's thousands of ways it could happen. But in this collapse survivor civil war simulation we ran, that's what happens. California, conservative states, counties started succeeding, and then it spread to Oregon, Colorado, Illinois, Massachusetts, and New York. And you see that today. We already have another form of civil war going on with Second Amendment sanctuary counties. I don't know if you've done a video on that or not, but if you look up Second Amendment sanctuary counties, and not just counties, there are cities and states in some areas, a lot of government officials, sheriffs, county boards are saying, we're not going to obey state gun control laws because they believe they're violating the Second Amendment to the Constitution, the right to bear arms. They're already in revolt. So again, to a large degree, you can say the U.S. is already in civil war. We've got counties, states, cities saying we're not going to obey gun control laws. We have liberal cities saying we're not going to obey the federal government's immigration laws. That's going on. That's open rebellion going on. You know, I'm not going to take off too much on President Trump today saying I may not follow the Constitution where it says I'm limited to 2 terms. A lot of people on the left are saying you're violating the Constitution because Congress is the one that sets policy and does spending, not the executive. That's considered a constitutional violation. Then you've got the let's assassinate CEOs of big firms, let's burn down the Tesla showrooms and factories. So to some degree, stuff already happening in the United States says that we are in some form of civil war now. Now, I don't think you're going to see anything like the first Civil War. You're not going to see California, you know, attacking Texas or anything like that. So you're not going to see states and armies clashing, but you can certainly see a civil war in terms of fighting at a local level within states and groups fighting. That kind of violence can absolutely occur in the United States. And to some degree, it's starting to happen in the United States.
We'll definitely see some decentralization. I think maybe that's a appropriate term for this because, of course, things are tightly centralized around the federal government at this point in time. But the United States is a big place. There's a lot of people. A lot of varied terrain, you know, a lot of, you know, from a military point of view, even like defensible, you know, terrains, which would, these natural boundaries could ultimately be what shape whatever emerges in that respect. But, you know, what you're saying is very significant because I even recently heard that the Biden administration and many others from that team were now being denied security briefs. And so like you're having a lot of these drastic changes and a lot of these things. What I fear is that when that they're going to do so much to kind of antagonize the other side like this. And, you know, a person might make the argument that it's justified. Maybe say it's unconstitutional. I'm not going to have that debate. But if you do all this stuff, they need to know that when the other shoe drops or when the other side, you know, when the tables turn, they're going to do those same tactics against them. So you're going to see like an authoritarian backlash. So even if Trump doesn't become tyrannical, the next administration will, if, you know, they are successful, would be it the Democrats or whoever. But, you know, you made a really interesting point about the normalization of violence against like CEOs, and there's definitely a dehumanization happening, it seems, where, and I'm not sure if it's just a confluence of a variety of different cultural factors. I mean, probably a lot of things: video games, social media, just watching guys being blown apart in Ukraine-Russia war time and time again. It seems like we're being dehumanized in a big way, and that could very well manifest as violence that I don't think a lot of people are, obviously in our very whitewashed society, we're not accustomed to. But I think, like you're saying, that sympathizing with the murder of the CEO is indicative that definitely we've fallen in a lot of ways in terms of our, I don't know, just our. There was a time when that would have, been reviled as just an egregious act of violence by everybody, but for some reason now it is, it is being. There's a lot of discontent, and a lot of people are feeling, the pinch of inflation, and it's manifesting in a way that people don't really understand what they're angry about. But a lot of it is to do, I think, with just the immiserating circumstances people find themselves in nowadays. The dollar is potentially tanking. I don't know what Trump is doing with the market right now. I mean, he seems to have some strategy in mind, but a lot of people are in disagreement. So yeah, this situation could easily work itself out to a fairly nasty, decentralizing collapse of sorts.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And, I think we were discussing before we started taping that the odds of us being able to figure out what is the event that actually triggers a civil war, is probably impossible. It could be anything. It could be an assassination attempt. It could be a wide variety of things. But the country is so divided that it may not take much to spark something that starts in one place and then it spreads. And you see that now in flash mobs. I mean, with social media, all it takes is one thing to go wrong. Political group A attacks political group B. That's all over social media. Retaliation starts. It gets encouraged and enforced by social media, organized by social media, and things take off. And then in the US, we saw this in Portland, for example. I mean, the George Floyd and the the riots that were going on there. You've seen it in Baltimore too. Almost any time in a big US city, if any kind of a political protest starts, bad people not associated with it, I'm not blaming the political cause, they'll jump onto that and they'll start looting. They'll use it because it's the perfect opportunity. And we've done a lot of, collapse survivor simulations on flash mobs and that. But as you know, anytime you overwhelm the police, and if you got a big political protest going on, police are overwhelmed. They're caught doing that. Well, the bad guys know. The gang members, the professional criminals know this is the time for me to break into your house or go into a Target and loot. So bad people know about it. And, in the US, we have 1 million known gang members in the United States, which means there's probably a lot more than that. And so those people, anytime you've got any kind of political protests going on, are going to start doing it. And there's something that's gotten worse in the US in recent years. I don't know if you've ever talked about the Walking Dead TV show. I mean, and for years I had Fortitude Ranch members come up and say, Drew, you got to watch this Walking Dead show. And I said, no, I'm not going to watch that. I don't believe in zombies. We got real threats to worry about. Why am I going to watch a zombie show? And then they kept lobbying me. Said, Drew, it's not about the zombies. It's about the marauders. That show shows you marauders. And they're right. It showed you the marauder threat, but it's worse than this. And I don't know if you've heard about this, but we got 8 locations, and yes, we got a lot of staff. So we get a lot of reports on the prepping world, but we've heard from several reliable reports, people saying that their way to prepare is not to join a survival community, not to watch your videos and get prepared. There's a lot of Americans who have already formed marauder groups. They are already planning now that when the shit hits the fan. I got bleeped on Fox News for saying shit hits the fan. I hope I don't get bleeped on your show for saying that. But when the shit hits the fan, they're forming a marauder group. They've already got it formed. That is their preparedness plan.
Yeah.
So a lot of those groups could start taking off. The second you get some big political violence goes, it spreads via social media. Some of these marauder groups may trigger. So in addition to the gang members, you've got now marauder groups that have started forming. I'm not saying right-wing militia, none of that. That's completely different issue. There's just some people now have kind of formed marauder groups because people are aware of prepping, they're aware of collapse threats, they're aware of the marauder threat. And, we'd like to think they're all, watching Canadian Prepper or joining Fortitude Ranch or getting prepared. Unfortunately, we hear several reliable reports. We've run into people who said they've got a marauder group. They formed a marauder group. That's their plan from the get-go. And that didn't exist before. I blame the Walking Dead TV show for kind of promoting it. Not their fault, but I think they triggered it. I don't know if you've heard any of that before or not.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't know if I'd say that The Walking Dead itself caused that per se. I would say, and I don't even know how prevalent that is in the preparedness space, but, there's definitely, like you made an interesting point about the opportunism during a protest and the limited capabilities of police under those conditions. I can't remember what the exact statistics are, but there's like one cop for every 1,000 people or something like that.
It's
So, I
really
mean,
low.
if a city starts getting turned upside down, yeah, you're going to have a lot of opportunistic people coming out of the woodwork. In terms of marauder groups exploiting the situation, I would only be worried about people who, like yourself, had like a military background and were really trained in order to, to use their firearm in a tactical way. Those are the people I would be genuinely concerned about. That, the ragtag elements, the disorganized, bands of misfits, I would be less concerned about. But, and I'm not saying that, this is going to be a common practice amongst, military people or ex-military people, but I'm saying that they're the only ones, in my opinion, who would be an enduring, credible threat, like somebody who was really trained for that purpose. Whereas just a bunch of, people who have never had that sort of training, they're probably going to get taken out when they, there's that whole defense to offense 3-to-1 casualty ratio. Like, you can only get lucky so many times. But I think that there's definitely, some people who might overestimate their capabilities in that respect. And, fortunately for the people on the other side of that, I don't think they're going to be very successful unless they're, really, if they have that training. And I think with video games and media consumption nowadays, we've been sort of desensitized to those things. But are people truly prepared for combat like that? I don't think so. Like, I think we're pretty soft here in the West. We've been fairly insulated from, the horrors of war and engaging it directly. People like yourself understand firsthand. And I think that's allowed us to kind of fantasize about, well, what would we do in this situation? But when it comes down to it, I don't know. I agree with you that it's not, and I've always used the metaphor of The Walking Dead. It's not the zombies that are the main protagonists. The zombies are kind of like the golden horde. It's really your peers that you have to worry about. The people who are on the same kind of technological level as you. Those are the ones who are going to pose like the greatest threat. Do you have any thoughts on that, or?
Well, you just remind me, there was an exercise, a civil defense kind of training pandemic exercise called Dark Winter. And former Georgia Senator Sam Nunn played the president in that scenario. And I believe it was smallpox was simulated in this exercise. And again, that's why we use simulations. It's the best way to train. You get into it, you can explore stuff, you got to make decisions. It's make believe, but it makes you think about stuff. Mm-hmm. So anyway, in the simulation, at the end of it, they stopped that for a couple of days because they realized the pandemic's spreading. There's no food distribution. The grocery stores are looted out. People are going to start starving to death, and they just called off the exercise. We don't want to play it anymore. But I think it was realistic. But anyway, Sam Nunn, who was playing the president in that scenario, in the report afterwards, and there was a congressional report filed on this, he said that in a collapse, your biggest enemy is your neighbor, could be your neighbor, which is exactly the point you were making. And, back to your point, I agree that, a lot of most people don't have the training to be a good skills to be a successful marauder in a collapse situation. But when a collapse is developing out of political protest, that's kind of what I was talking about. People think, oh, how we're never going to get into civil war, it could never happen. And I say nonsense. It can evolve in irrational means. Rational ways. That's how wars start. World War I was assassination of some worthless duke, in Serbia, and it just escalated out of control. So a lot of things could go south for us. But if you've got a lot of people who, when there's political protest, police are overwhelmed, they start breaking into houses to steal and loot, even if they're not well trained to do so, they're not going after a prepper community like Fortitude Ranch. They're breaking into someone's houses completely unprepared because what the hell's going on? There's no collapse. So that could start, and then that could spread, and it could just get out of control fast. There was there was a bad event in the United Kingdom, and I'm pretty sure it's 2011. In 2011, the United Kingdom had this really bizarre thing. Some fighting and attacks on police broke out in London. There was no cause. It wasn't a, George Floyd event. It just started. And there was violence that occurred. And the next morning, it stopped overnight. And the next morning they woke up and said, what the hell was that? What caused this? We don't know. Thank God it's over. The next night, not only did it start again in London, it spread all over the United Kingdom, all the major cities. This went on for 4 nights. The United Kingdom had a collapse, and there was no trigger event. It just spread by social media. It went on for 4 nights. And at the end of the 4th night, they called up all the reserve police, and they kept them on duty, and they put it down. They stopped this collapse, got law and order back. There was formal studies done. I've studied them. Those reports, there never was a trigger event identified. But what this is important about, Nate, is that it shows you that a collapse can happen, law and order can break down for completely irrational means, and there can be no trigger event. If a lot of people start breaking the law, start breaking into homes, and they had businessmen killed defending their houses, they had arson, attacks on police, all this crap going on in the United Kingdom, a civilized country, in 2011 with no trigger event. So could a civil war in the U.S. develop and lead to violence and a collapse? I say, hell yes. There's thousands of ways it could happen, none of them rational, where people, sit down and plan it or organize it. It just, things break down. And our society is that way. And when you see, CEOs being assassinated, Tesla dealerships being attacked, and arson, you see what we saw in Portland during the COVID stuff. Protests get worse. I mean, if Trump really does move forward on, hey, I'm going to run for a 3rd term, I'm going to ignore the constitutional amendment, yeah, you're going to see more violent protests. And who knows what sparks it? It could be a lot of things. But I think the U.S., to some degree, is starting to see signs of civil war, and something trigger event, something that could happen that could trigger getting a lot worse is very, very possible, maybe even likely. Now, in our collapse model, that's 16 to 57%. Civil war was rated low as a collapse event. I think it was like a 2% annual chance. We rated it low. But because, there's so many other things that could happen. H5N1 is the one that worries me the most, or some other bioengineered pandemic. But it very well could be a civil war. You're not going to be able to estimate it with any statistical basis whatsoever. But you can reasonably see when things are likely to cause a collapse and lead to a disaster. And then you just have to admit that it could be something triggers a collapse that's never been on Canadian Prepper and wasn't even in our model. Something else could do it.
Yeah, something entirely asymmetric. There's a spectrum of civil war, I guess, from civil unrest to like a slow grind deterioration into a authoritarian dystopia to, on the other end, a full-blown civil war between multiple belligerents. We could easily see a situation, I think, now where the ability of the government to respond and bring control back, where they lose that capability. Because I think people are so accustomed to, there might be riots, but eventually it will be brought under control, right? Eventually it's going to be contained and it's going to be relatively benign. Even George Floyd, as enduring as it was, ultimately it was contained and it was corralled, and it wasn't able to really take root in any way which was a threat to the system as a whole. But we could easily see, or at least I could easily see a situation where as the economic stress on all the institutions that keep things centralized start to become more stressed, you could easily have a situation where, things just happen, like you said, crowd psychology, some mob mania, took root and people started it was still present today in California where you have these mobs of people going and converging on one store and, basically cleaning out the store, right? You could have a situation like that just started almost for no reason and just endured, and the police would never be able to fully get a handle on the situation. Now, it's interesting that you say trigger event, because as we were talking before we started this interview, we were talking about how, we all predict the outcomes. Like during the pandemic, I think I had made a video about how, there's a pandemic, we're probably going to see riots, crime's going to go up. But we were never thinking about George Floyd. We never thought that, this would be what caused people to run out and loot and do all this stuff. We always associated pandemic with lawlessness on some level, but there was a trigger event. So underlying were all of these other tensions, people being cooped up in their homes, people, dealing with financial stress and all this stuff, and all that manifested at this rage, which was basically unjustly, seen as being the result of this incident that happened. So, yeah, it's incredible how, like you say, we envision these scenarios, but we don't know what that trigger event is going to be. We don't know. And it's always seems like, that's the definition of a black swan, right? It's something that you can't really expect, but, we all understand what it's going to entail. We just don't know what it's going to be. So I think that's a very interesting observation. But what I fear is that we could be reaching a point where the resilience and the strength of our system starts to wane so much that some trigger event is going to unfold, and they're not going to be able to get a hold of it. And things just deteriorate continuously, precipitously, to the point of maybe there is secession, maybe there's, a breakup or a balkanization of the United States. I mean, who knows, right? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I agree with you completely. And the problem is we don't have a lot of resources. So you look at Katrina, for example. When Katrina hit, it should have been a relatively small scale disaster. We saw it coming. It was a localized area. But Katrina was a disaster for us. Police deserted their posts, widespread looting. I was in the Nebraska Air National Guard. We sent forces down to that area to help with the Katrina. Most U.S. states sent Guard resources to help them with the recovery operations. Well, that was isolated. If political violence starts in the U.S. and spreads, it can be in all 50 states. It's not one little area. When we did a collapse survivor Civil War scenario, I said, in one of them, as it was running, we had in our thing that political violence got out of hand so bad that the National Guard was called up. That was running in our make-believe collapse survivor simulation. In the real world, while that exercise was running, this was like March of last year, New York City did call up the National Guard for real to back up because the violence was out of control. They didn't have enough police to manage their subway. So we've already got, and they've done that again in New York City. We've already got situations where we have so few police and violence can get so bad, crime so out of control in good times that we've got to call up the Guard. So imagine now a pandemic that's all over the place, or political violence and fights that are going on all over the U.S. We don't have the resources to respond to that. And so we wouldn't be able to. So something could indeed develop into a collapse that has a nonsensical, irrational, seemingly small, trivial trigger event. But if it spreads, and it will spread with social media and the news we've got today, to go on across the nation. And then if the bad guys, the looters, the gang members, just criminals and bad people or marauders start at that point breaking into houses to steal food and resources, The country could have a collapse, and how do you recover from that when it's nationwide? You can't just call up the guard or the military and fix that. There's not enough of them. How long will it last? We have no clue. But if it's nationwide and the country is divided as today, it's unpredictable. You could have a collapse coming from something that, again, you and I would never say this is a rational way to get to a disaster, but it does happen.
Well, it's almost like what we're seeing right now with the economy. You know, the economy was wildly overvalued. I'm not sure if you follow it too much, but, you know, all of the major equities indexes were, you know, record levels of overvaluation. And in that situation, it can kind of continue. You know, it's like an avalanche. I use that as a metaphor where you can continue to have layers of snow, you know, and pack on over time. And all it might take is like the fluttering of a bird's wings or, you know, a stone that gets dislodged or something like that, something that you didn't expect to bring the whole thing down. And of course, tariffs are what's being cited as the culprit in the current financial downturn that we're seeing, at least in the equities markets. But it could have been anything because the conditions for collapse were already present. It's just that, you know, it doesn't take much. It really, like you're saying, it could be nothing. It could just be, you know, a bunch of people decide one day to coalesce around a major store or institution and start rioting for no reason, or at least no stated reason. So yeah, we're at a point right now where, you know, I'm definitely seeing, and I'm not sure what you're seeing on your end, I'm definitely seeing a new appreciation for preparedness. It's almost become commonplace, particularly in Europe, where now it's being advised for people to have, you know, 72-hour bags and things of this nature. I mean, you could see that one coming from a mile away. What are your thoughts on the changes to the preparedness community that you've observed since the pandemic? And what, if anything, have you done differently after seeing, you know, how we as a society responded to, you know, the recent pandemic and all of the events that have unfolded, the war and numerous other incidents that have unfolded? Has your strategy for how you've laid out these Fortitude Ranch, has it changed at all?
Well, Fort Ranch's strategy hasn't changed because we were kind of designed with pandemics in mind, and we really don't care what the trigger event is. You know, whatever causes it, when law and order breaks down, you got a collapse, you got marauders out there, our defense is the same. We chop down trees to clear lines of fire, stack them into walls. All of our members have weapons. We got guard posts. You know, we're well organized and run. So we defend ourselves, but, you know, we have fields and gardens, we plant, we do all that. But I want to go back to your point about the economy. You're absolutely right. The stock market bubble is going to burst. There is likely to be a recession, and that could be the trigger. And I mentioned a prepper poll earlier. We did ask them, what do you see as the most likely event that could lead to a collapse? And it was the economy. And the problem's going to be in it, these overlap. So let's say there's a recession, a lot of people now are unemployed, and they're demanding benefits. And Trump says, we're trying to cut back our budget deficit. We're not going to give you huge benefits. And they say, no, I want you to throw money at me because I'm unemployed. That could be something that combines with the political divisions we've got to trigger widespread violence, and then things pile on from there and go out of control. There's just so many ways it could happen. So we're seeing more and more concern, more people interested in joining Fortitude Ranch due to economic, a recession, collapse concerns. But in terms of to answer your question, has Fortitude Ranch changed its methods? Not at all. We're designed for pretty much any collapse event. We operate the same. It's all the same process. Get our members in. We use the Collapse Survivor app to send out alerts. And if you get the Collapse Survivor app, you'll get the Fortitude Ranch alerts, whether you're a member or not. So when we see H5N1 spreading, we'll send out an alert. If we see, hey, it looks to us like this political violence is starting to get out of control, get ready. Or get to Fortitude Ranch. We think this is it. We think this is going to lead to a collapse. We'll put out the warnings on that. But once our members come to Fortitude Ranch, you know, we start building our defenses up. We get ready. We do, you know, depending on the time of year, we increase our gardening and we prepare for a collapse. But it almost doesn't matter what the trigger event is. Our procedures are pretty much the same. In a pandemic, yeah, we got some quarantine things we got to deal with. But by and large, we're designed for any kind of an eventuality.
So, you know, one of my issues with like preparedness communities, and I know yours is somewhat more unique than others, is that you have a bunch of people who don't really know each other, and I guess the concern for a person like myself is, well, are the doors to me going to be open when I get there? And what is the politics going to be when I get there? Because, and how is this better than me just trying to ride it out with my own family, extended family, friends, and those sorts of things? Like, is there a certain person you're like targeting with respect to this? Like who fits the profile of somebody who would be an ideal candidate for one of your preparedness communities?
Well, we're preparedness for the middle class, so we don't require you have a military background or training. Yes, we do tend to have a lot of military members, but it's more because they're more aware of how things can go to hell and you can have a collapse. But you need to have a lot of guards on duty 24/7. So if you're going to keep 6 guard posts, man, and at a Fortitude Ranch, we've got about 6 guard posts at most of them. That takes a lot of people. You're already into the count of you got to have at least 50 people just to man your guard posts. But again, we're gardening. You got to take care of chickens and sheep and rabbits and all the other animals. We're going to do massive hunting. Well, the honest word is poaching. when there's a collapse starting, we will be shooting every living creature in sight, to make into jerky and to get more food stored. So we need a lot of members, and our security depends on our people. We want a lot of people. And in terms of politics, we don't expect to have that. The people join Fortitude Ranch because of the ranch manager. They're the person in charge. They're the ones who know everything. They're the ones telling you what to do, giving you directions. We have member training. A lot of our members have skills. We have medical clinics. So, we've got doctors and nurses on our staff, not our staff, but in our membership as well. But we need everyone. And our mission statement, we will keep our members alive. That's what we're all about doing. No one is going to get, forced out. No one's going to get punished at Fortitude Ranch. If someone becomes a security alert and a problem, we would tell them, hey, stop doing this, or we're going to revoke your membership. You're going to have to leave. But in a collapse situation, our members will know we all got to cooperate. We all got to work our asses off. Everyone has to do guard duty, all these tasks, keeping the wood stoves going, all the work to do. We need our members and we need each other. So I think we'll be a very, very cohesive group.
Yeah, so like how do you ensure that you're not bringing people into the group who are going to be problematic? Because it almost seemed like this sort of endeavor would benefit from some screening process
Sure.
to somewhat ensure that people weren't liabilities.
It's largely self-selection bias, or normally if someone wants to join Fortitude Ranch, they thought it over. They don't want to be a marauder. They do want to be prepared. They've looked at us and decided, yeah, this looks like a good fit. So they've already done most of the screening for us. But certainly our sales staff, and when we do the tour, you're asking questions of us. We're asking questions of you and getting to know people. Then we do member training events as well, where people can get to know each other better. But again, the key thing is that there's a ranch manager, there's assistant ranch managers. Well, we're in charge. And again, there's like 100+ members at a Fortitude Ranch location. So, let's say you and 3 other guys decide, hey, we want to take this over. There's no chance for you doing that. You're going to have to work with the ranch manager. We're going to know what's going on. And again, we have to stay together to defend against marauder groups. Our whole goal is to never get in a fight with a marauder group. We keep our guard posts manned. We keep our cleared lines of fire. We keep our gardens going and the animals all inside and safe at night. We're going to be a very hard target. Marauder groups won't come after us, but that depends on the fact that when a marauder observer looks at us during a day, we enforce the rule in a collapse. You will not be outside without your weapon. So we want the marauder observers to report back, holy shit, they got at least 6 guard posts I can see. They got defensive walls, cleared lines of fires, and every one of those SOBs has a weapon all the time. So we want them to see a disciplined group with a lot of people with weapons, defensive walls. So they're not going to come after us. What they're going to do, a marauder group's going to do, is they're going to go after the soft, easy targets. So we make ourselves the hardest target out there to get after. What our members worry about more, frankly, is our government. And I think you're aware of this. Executive orders state that a government agency in the U.S. can seize food from you. Well, you're in Canada. If you're really in Canada, they can't do it. But in the U.S.,
they
can
could do it
seize
here
food
too.
from
They
you.
could definitely do it here. I guarantee you.
That's what our members are most concerned about is what happens if the army gets sent after us. And I keep telling them, look, I was in the National Guard. Politicians may say, hey, go attack these people and start seizing their food. I think our Guard troops would refuse orders like that. I really do. And the Guard comes from the people from the local area. I don't think National Guard troops would support that, but it is a fact. I'm not doing a conspiracy theory. Executive orders in the United States and have for decades state that government officials can seize it from the civilians because their goal is continuity of government, keeping themselves alive, themselves in power. They're going to take more police protection. When you need police the most, they're going to take more of it to protect the top politicians and elected officials. So that's the bigger threat we face. Marauders are a big threat. Government is the second one that our members worry about. But we're the good guys. We're the team that's going to make ourselves be able to deter or defeat a Marauder attack or a government attack if it comes to that. But I just don't think National Guard troops are ever going to attack American civilians to steal their supplies. I hope not.
Yeah, I mean, we can definitely have a discourse about the expropriation of stuff and why I unfortunately think that because people are so conformist and history bears this out, that they will very likely follow orders so long as there's enough compartmentalization and the momentum is in a certain direction. It's very unlikely that people are going to resist orders unless there is some leading charismatic figure to say, no, we're not going to do this because it's anti-constitutional. So I'm not as optimistic as you in that respect. But I guess what I would be somewhat concerned about is any disunity emerging amongst the particular group at Fortitude Ranch or any prepping community. And this has always been one of my concerns because I've lived in and I've worked in remote work communities, and I know there's always a certain politic that emerges. And usually, for the most part, things flow harmoniously. But if people feel like they're being mistreated or there's favorites being played or somebody is perhaps having too much power or authority over what gets rationed or this and that, I think and these are obviously secondary things that are, these are only going to become problems after a major event, and the first order of the day is going to be protecting the community. And that in itself might be enough social glue in order to prevent these things I'm talking about from really becoming.
No, I agree with you. No, I agree with you. And that's one of the reasons why I formed Fortitude Ranch over a decade ago is I knew I couldn't do it on my own. I knew I had to be into big groups. So I knew they needed a survival community. And then I looked around and there's been voluntary survival communities for decades. The problem is they don't last long. They tend to fall apart because of those disagreements. I mean, we have 2 radiation detectors. They're expensive things, but we've got 2 because we believe in, Murphy's Law, if anything goes wrong, it will. So we've got 2. Well, you can imagine the fight that goes on saying, should we buy a second one of these? Try to get, a group of 50 to 75 to 100 plus people agree on that. They'll have a fight over that. Well, we don't have that. We are not a volunteer survival community. We're a business. Staff is in charge. We own the property. You're a member. It's a country club membership style. You pay an upfront fee to join and then quarterly dues. It's our business. We own it. We run it. Our mission is we keep our members alive. We treat them fairly. And our survival, I mean, my family's going to Fortitude Ranch. My family's survival doesn't just depend on me. It depends on our members. We need 100 plus people. We need the doctors, we need the mechanic if our tractor breaks down. We need all that stuff. But most of all, we need 100 plus armed people because we want those guard posts manned 24/7, 6 of them. And then we want to have 100 plus people run into the walls and we see a Marauder group, sound the alarm, mount our walls and show them, you don't want to mess with us. You'll get slaughtered.
And so, people are relying on your good faith argument here, and that you as an individual, I could see as being somebody I would trust personally. But how do they know, these other 8 communities who are obviously not necessarily going to be communicating with each other?
No,
once things go.
when I say I'm saying I'm the ranch manager, for example. So every place has a ranch manager. Every location has their ranch manager. That's the person in charge. And that's who our members know. That's pretty much, for a lot of them, that's the only one they know. Now, others come to member training, know some of the other members, or they'll know assistant ranch managers, who again tend to be, most of them are former military folks. But they rely on the staff to give them directions and to keep them alive. But we rely on all of us. We need the manpower. We're growing food. Yeah, we got stockpiled food, but you need to be able to grow and ranch for really long-term survival. When the grid goes down, it's at least a year, it may be several years. If it's a pandemic, it's going to last for probably over a year. And then how long does it take us to get law and order back? I have no clue. It could be a long time. So we've got to do a lot of labor. Yeah, we got tractors, but it's largely manual labor for our ranching and gardening. We need a lot of people for our long-term survival.
Yeah, there's no doubt that having a community is really the only way that a person is going to ride that out, because you can't do it alone unless you're really remote and far removed from all the threats. Even then, if you want a higher standard of living, you're going to need that specialization that comes from having a
Well, marauders are going to
diversity.
go everywhere, Nate. If it lasts long term, they're going to go everywhere. You're not going to find a place where a marauder group won't be.
I just mean like in terms of, yeah, in terms of like the more acute threats, like there's going to be, like if you're within, city limits or you're near a city, you're not going to be as far up the supply chain if you're out in the backwoods. I mean, you're going to be the last that people mess with. I mean, there's going to be, depending on where you are, of course, but if you're somebody who lives, like in the periphery of a city, you're going to be the first in the supply chain that people are going to capitalize on. But I guess, what I'm kind of getting at is there some kind of charter or some kind of thing that makes you, the people can be confident that if they do make this investment in Fortitude Ranch, that they're actually going to be, that it's 100% guaranteed that it's going to be what it proclaims to be when the time comes? Like, what is the guarantee above and beyond the organization's word?
It's the fact that, as I said, our staff depends on our members for survival, just like members depend on staff. We all depend on each other. We need all of us. And I have to disagree with you on the city thing. I mean, I think people in cities are going to be fleeing cities as fast as they can from the first time it gets bad. Some people may take them a day or two to realize, yeah, this really is a collapse. But I think everyone's going to bail out of cities. And for most people who aren't well prepared, which is unfortunately most, they're going to head for the hills. That's the term. Go out into the forest. And they have this stupid notion, oh, I'll go out and hunt deer and chop down trees and build a home. Yeah, you and tens of millions of other people, or hundreds of millions, will be out there doing that. And a lot of Americans are going to go into Canada, thinking that, oh, there's less population up there, we'll roam up into Canada. They're going to go everywhere. If the collapse lasts it doesn't have to last for a year. If a collapse lasts a month, I don't think you're going to find any place anywhere in the United States where you won't find people out looking for food. And the fact that it's remote makes it more attractive for people who are not prepared and are looking for a place to survive. They're going to go there because they're going to see people all over the place. And if you're trying to camp out in a nice national forest where there's thousands of other people in your immediate area, you're going to get killed. So you're going to have to go to the more remote areas. I mean, Fort Ranch, Nevada is arguably our best spot because I won't tell you where it's exactly, but it's high mountain desert. So it's really rough for marauder groups to take out Fort Ranch, Nevada, because, we're an oasis. We've got springs, we've got plants and stuff. All around us is desert. That's a hard place. But most of our locations don't have deserts to protect them. They're in forests, and we know darn well there's going to be marauders out there, people starving to death. Some of them are going to come begging for food. We do that in our Collapse Survivor app all the time. If you play that, you're going to have the situation, hey, there's a starving lady with a kid outside begging for food. Do you want to give them any of that? And it's probabilistic, meaning there is no right or wrong answer. And by the random number generator, it could be that, yeah, she is starving and is legitimate. It could be a 40% chance. nope, she's part of a marauder group. As soon as you come out, they're going to shoot you. Or there's a 20% chance that she is a distraction. She is part of our group. She's a distraction. They're coming at you from the other end of your compound now. So you're going to have to deal with that. But I don't think there's any place on the earth you can go where you're not going to run into marauders. So I have people telling me, oh, I'm going to get on a boat and go out into the ocean. I wouldn't do that. You couldn't pay me to do that. There's going to be pirates out there doing the same thing and attacking other boats out on the ocean. I don't think there's any place you can hide. I do not think you can hide anywhere. I think marauders will end up everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think eventually there's going to be desperation everywhere. It's just a matter of, if you can get off the secondary roads into the tertiary and quaternary roads, there's a less likelihood that people will have the means to even get there in the first place. And if you do have groups venturing that far out, I would surmise that they would likely not be very sizable. I think a lot of the big groups, if there are these marauder, speaking totally hypothetically here, they're going to be going for, the bigger fish, and, somebody who's has a homestead in the backwoods of nowhere isn't necessarily going to be the most prize catch, at least certainly not in the early phases. So I think there's two strategies here. Like there was a show that recently came out called Homestead, and in that show, it's right outside of Salt Lake City, and one of the criticisms that much of my audience had against the homestead property, which is a fully fledged homestead property, is that it's so close to the city, and you're not gray man, like you're not off the beaten path, you're not respecting the principles of like concealment and out of sight, out of mind. But there's like with your strategy, I don't think even if you were accessible that a lot of people would really mess with you, especially if you had a significant amount of manpower and people with military backgrounds who really knew what they were doing. So like there's kind of two approaches. Like I think you can be in proximity to danger zones if you have a really good setup and a strong community. I think, in fact, there's an advantage there almost. But if you are a family or an extended family, maybe you have 10 to 20 people in your group, a smaller group, then I think there is advantages in maybe venturing a little bit further out. But like you're saying, your place in Nevada there is fairly remote, fairly isolated. Nobody, at least, knows where it is, as far as you know. I mean, I'm not sure what sort of agreements you have with your members to ensure that they don't tell people where it is. Obviously, they have a vested interest in not doing so. But yeah, I mean, I guess there's different philosophies. So, your strategy of regimentation and structure and a larger community with more people, I think there's a lot of merit to that. And ultimately, I think it's a wise decision. However, I'm still very reluctant myself personally, and maybe that's because I'm slightly more resourceful than some people, to kind of sign my life to that sort of it's something that I'm not in control of, right? And me as a prepper, I'm very reluctant to go into somebody else's world and let them kind of dictate the terms of how things going to go. And so this is where, is this making sense? Is this something?
Absolutely. No, I agree with absolutely everything you said, Nate. When I say you can't hide, I mean in a long-term collapse. I agree with you. If you're in a really remote area and the collapse is over in a couple weeks, yeah, you may never have any marauders out there. But I think a lot of the collapse threats we face, they're going to last for a long time, and people will get everywhere. And I don't think you're going to get a month. I think probably most places in the U.S., maybe not Upper Canada, but in most places in the U.S. and Southern Canada, there'll be marauders of groups. I agree with you, not a huge one in the initial weeks, but eventually they're going to be there because they're going to be looking for food, and it's going to be so bad everywhere else. People are going to be trying to get to remote areas. So I agree with you on that. But I just don't think you can survive with the small group, even if you're super duper skilled. Because here's the deal. Let's say Nate and you and I are together and we're marauders. Two of us, just two of us. I could take out a family-sized group of 25 people, because a family-sized group of 25 people with fantastic skills, you and I can still take them out. The reason is we're not going to go blundering in there shooting at them.
snipe.
We're going to watch them from a distance.
Yeah.
They're not going to see me observing, you or me observing them. So we're going to eventually figure out they got 2 guard posts. These are the guard posts. And then so at 3 o'clock in the morning, Nate, you're over here, whatever your comfortable shooting range is distance. I'm over here. We're on walkie-talkies. It's 3 in the morning. These are the only 2 folks up. The other 23 are sleeping. And you ready, Nate? So am I. Okay. 3, 2, 1. We both shoot at the same time. We've just killed the 2 guards. We're pretty good shots. They're sitting still. We're arrested shooting. So we've just killed the 2 guards. Did someone inside hear that shot? Maybe, but the tendency is 3 in the morning, you hear some noise, you wake up maybe, you don't hear anything else, you go back to sleep. So Nate, you and I stand still, we stay still, but after 10 minutes, there's no lights coming on, it looks like no one's woken up, now we move in. And if they're lucky, we just steal stuff and leave. If they're not lucky, we go room to room knifing people. And by the way, I've just done a scene from Walking Dead where they went into a bad guy's place and they went room to room. The Marauder, they were actually the good guys, killing a Marauder group in their place and knifed everyone. But so, I was like you. I was a prepper on my own for a long time, but I eventually figured out I can't do it. I don't have the people. I got to have a lot of guards on duty. I got to have this skills. And then sharing the expense. I mean, dividing it amongst 10 people versus 25 versus 100 plus. That's why I want a survival community, but it has to be organized. It can't be a voluntary thing. You can't get 100 people to agree on anything. So it's got to be the kind of the model that we've adopted at Fortitude Ranch. And we've been doing it for 10 years now, and we think it worked. Have we done through a collapse? No. Are we going to do one? Unfortunately, it's inevitable. We are going to have a collapse. I think there's a good chance this year. If we dodge it this year, a good chance next year. I just don't see avoiding it. I mean, you're not going to stop H5N1 from mutating at this point when it's already spreading in so many mammal populations. 1 or 2 mutations, it's spreading between us. Not going to work.
That's your big thing is H5N1. What are
That's
some
what worries me the most.
Yeah. And so, and I think that is almost a given at this point. At some point, it could even be biowarfare induced. But is there any other scenarios that you think are up there on the likelihood list?
Oh, yeah. The economic collapse you talked about earlier, that is what most people rate as the most likely to happen. Is it most likely to lead to a collapse? It's not likely to lead to collapse, but there's such a high chance of a recession. And if you even had a small chance that it leads to collapse, that could lead to a 5% annual chance of an economic recession leading to collapse. And now you combine that with the political environment we've got in the US and the hatred going on, hating Musk, hating CEOs of big companies. Could that yield violence that leads to a collapse where police lose control? Absolutely. It very much could. And then our electric grid. If China's going to invade Taiwan, and by the way, I haven't released this yet, I'll say it on your program. I'm about to put out a paper recommending that the United States abandon its defense guarantees to Taiwan. It's suicidal and incredibly stupid for us to be doing that. We're provoking China into either launching a nuclear attack on us or using their agents to take down our electric grid. We've got to get out of that because we won't survive a collapse. China can prevail. China will win in a war with us in Taiwan because they'll use nuclear weapons. They'll escalate to nuclear weapons. They're willing to exchange nuclear weapons and lose 10 million, 100 million Chinese. The US president is not. We will back down in a nuclear war over Taiwan. We will lose. And if they take out our electric grid in the process of a nuclear exchange, again, not my numbers, up to 90% of Americans will die when our grid goes down. Watch Grid Down, Power Up, that documentary. Don't take my word for it. They're citing congressional studies. It's over for us. It's a collapse that, we'll survive at Fortitude Ranch, but when it's over, what kind of country are we going to have? Not much of one. We're going to have to rebuild. By the way, that's about the biggest objection I get for people for Fortitude Ranch is, if it's really that bad that I need Fortitude Ranch, maybe I don't want to survive. And that's why I think young people should be prepping more than older folks like myself. I mean, you've got the most reason to prepare as young people because you've got decades of your life ahead of you. You need to survive, and you're going to have to be dealing with this collapse threats forever. It's not like we're going to have a collapse this fall and then it's 10 years of bliss. We're in the age of collapse. I've got a video out called The Age of Collapse. These new technologies, artificial intelligence, we haven't even talked about that yet, but the new ways that allow an individual to develop a weapon of mass destruction, that's our future. So a Unabomber, Al Qaeda, anyone who wants to is increasingly going to be able to enrich uranium, make a nuclear weapon. We did a scenario like that on the Collapse Survivor app. Terrorists use AI to develop new means to enrich uranium, and they blew up 3 US downtowns with nuclear weapons. That's the future we've got. There's going to be a lot of collapse events, and young folks, that's their future. They're going to be living with collapse. Year after year, they're going to have to deal with some kind of a collapse.
Yeah, it's what are your thoughts on like the situation in Russia and Ukraine and Iran? Like, what are in your opinion, is this something that you're concerned about? It sounds like you're pretty, not certain, but it sounds like you are convinced that H5N1 is the biggest threat. But what about these other theaters of conflict that we're seeing?
Oh, yeah, it's just people ask me what's the most when I list that. Again, there's 50 events we track. Absolutely. I mean, Putin has threatened to use nuclear weapons. If he keeps losing in that war and escalates to a nuclear war, according to US and NATO doctrine, if Putin launches a nuclear attack on Poland, for example, which has been helping Ukraine a lot and is a member of NATO, if Russia attacks Poland, according to our doctrine, we will launch a nuclear attack on Russia. And if we do that, Russia's going to launch a nuclear attack on us. And again, 2 nuclear weapons is all it takes to destroy the US electric grid. They launch high in our atmosphere. Even North Korea can do it. The electromagnetic pulse will destroy transformers across the US, and it will take us at least a year, several to get them back. In the meantime, no food gets produced, nothing gets manufactured, no municipal water systems. If you don't have electricity, you do not pump water, no municipal water system, no gasoline gets pumped, nothing gets done. Does food get produced? Hell no. Our food production is mechanized. One last thing that I want to bring up, it's a related but distant topic. China has been stockpiling grain for years. They're getting ready to have a war over Taiwan. They've got enough grain stockpiled to feed the Chinese population for up to 2 years. What has our government in the United States done for us for stockpiled food? Not a goddamn thing. There are no civil defense food stockpiles. We had a little bit built up in the 60s, but there weren't enough votes to be purchased with it. So our scumbag politicians eliminated the US civil defense food program. It's gone. We have no stockpiled food. Americans are going to be annihilated in a collapse. We're going to be dying by the hundreds of millions. I don't know if you'll be much better in Canada, but we ain't going to make it. China does a better job protecting its citizens than the US does. And we're in a bad state. I hate to be too gloom and doom on your program, but we're in a really bad state, and I don't see how we avoid a collapse.
I think you're in the right place with respect to doom and gloom. So you're not the first, put it that way.
Now, there's a lot of us, and more people are prepping, but I think it pisses me off is the biggest barrier of prepping, the biggest problem we face is our irresponsible, horrible government. Meanwhile, they are improving. I mean, if you drive by Mount Weather in Virginia, where Congress is going, massive construction going on. Year after year, they're building and expanding that facility. They've got Raven Rock. They've got hundreds of facilities for themselves. They improve it, and they aren't doing a goddamn thing for U.S. citizens, except an executive order that says if we run out of food at Raven Rock and Mount Weather and all other FEMA and military facilities, we're going to come take yours.
Wow.
So I'm mad at China, but I'm a lot mad at my government than I am at Putin or China or, almost Al Qaeda. Our government in the United States is so horrible, so bad in setting us up for disaster, not doing a damn thing to warn or prepare U.S. citizens.
So how does a person like yourself of a high academic pedigree and relatively high military rank, being a former intelligence officer, Harvard, PhD, like what was it that clicked for you that made you want to go down the path of preparedness? And why do you think others who are of your ilk are not doing the same thing?
Well, again, it's because I was an intelligence officer, so I'm aware of the threats. So when the Soviet Union fell, The US president, to score political points, declared a political dividend. We unilaterally eliminated all of our battlefield nuclear weapons in the US military because that scored a lot of votes for President Bush. And they said, and I said, are you out of your mind? The world is not safer just because the Soviet Union is gone. Again, new technologies are making it such that, I could talk for 30 minutes about nanotechnology. All these new technologies are coming out. AI on top of this, our future is one of collapse. And it's been obvious for decades. Biologists have been testifying before Congress for over a decade saying you are going to have an H5N1 pandemic, you are going to have other pandemics, you're going to have people using bioengineering to design and manipulate viruses to create pandemics. You need to get ready for it. Has Congress done a damn thing? No. They've had congressional testimony saying the US electric grid is a frickin' disaster. It's fragile. It's easy to destroy. 90% of Americans are going to die. You need to harden the grid. That was over a decade ago, Nate, over a decade ago. Has Congress done anything? Not a damn thing. Our government knows this crap is coming. I can quote you testimony in front of Congress on it, and they don't do a damn thing, except to prepare themselves to survive. They don't do anything for citizens. That's why I said I'm madder at our government than I am any other threat we face. I'm madder at the US government.
Yeah, for me, that's an analog of the just-in-time delivery system of efficiency, is that the government operates in a very similar way, whereas instead of putting storage in the back rooms because it costs more money, instead of having insurance, which costs money, they just choose not to. And instead, they misuse that money and that resources in other ways, except when it comes to saving themselves. And you cited Raven Rock. There's a book called Raven Rock, How the Elites Plan to Save Themselves, or something like that. And by the sounds of things, they're continuing to build out their own continuity of government plans, while not even advising the population that they should get prepared. And that's the crazy thing. And the reason why they're not is, I presume, it's because they don't want to create too much controversy and panic surrounding something. But you would think, in the very least, they would say, you should be getting prepared because we don't have the capacity to help you. But they're not even saying that. So
they're horrible. So they're not like Switzerland. Switzerland has massive programs, shelters, government supported. If you serve in the Swiss military, when you leave, you keep your weapons. They've got fantastic civil defense. They can blow up roads and bridges and tunnels coming into Switzerland. Finland, Sweden, lots of countries do stuff to prepare for themselves. China is stockpiling food for their population. Our government is not preparing for us. They're just planning to steal from us if they're necessary in case they start running low on food. As I said, there's nothing worse than the US government when it comes to disgraceful, irresponsible performance and making us not just unprepared for a collapse, but set up to die.
Yeah, it's strange, the rapacious nature of Western governments, starkly contrasted against what we all perceive to be the axis of evil, who, in the very least, and while there is restrictions on rights and freedoms and things that we can do here that they can't do there, it really is a situation where you're on your own here. And so with that freedom comes the responsibility of knowing that, the government, while they're not going to potentially take away your rights and freedoms, although that's a subject of debate. And I just say, idealistically, the government here in the West is going to be more tolerant and allot us more rights and freedoms. At the same time, that carries over into a collapse scenario where we're going to be on our own. Whereas in China, where they have all these strategic stockpiles, they're planning the big subterranean cities, these, cavernous 1,000-mile tunnel systems under the earth. They're prepared to at least keep a certain amount of their population alive. And I guess that is the benefit of authoritarian regimes. And I always say that, it's better to be an authoritarian regime in a crisis, in a collapse, but not necessarily when things are good. And so as we're moving now into the age of consequences, those societies who are more regimented and who have more restrictions on freedom of movement and freedom of thought, they're going to excel in that environment because they can easily control their populations. Whereas here, it's going to be dog eat dog, every man for himself.
Mhm.
So you were saying that you were driving by Mount Weather and they're doing upgrades to that?
Oh yeah, if you drive Mount Weather, I mean you can't go in the facility. It's well protected. But if you go by there, you'll see cranes and all kinds of construction going on. And that's above ground. Remember, most of Mount Weather is underground. It's an
Right.
underground facility. But that's been going on for years.
Huh.
I don't give out our precise locations, but Fort Ranch, West Virginia, we're on the other side of the border. But we have, for example, we have a member at Fortitude Ranch, West Virginia, who's worked at Mount Weather. So he's been inside there and doesn't even live that far away. So we're well aware of what's going on there. And they continue to do big preparations for government survival and not a damn thing for US citizens to survive. It's just an absolute disgrace.
And so, as a former military officer and intelligence officer, uh, is there been like a conflict of interest in you talking about this kind of stuff? Like, has it ever been detrimental for you personally in your own career, or like, has there ever been any resistance like to your Fortitude Ranch
No, I
endeavor?
mean, I was a retired military officer, so I
Yeah.
wasn't running Fortitude Ranch while I was a reserve officer. I was active, then I was guard, and then I was reserve. So I wasn't in a full-time position where that could be used against me or anything like that. And we're not. They occasionally look at us and say, "Hey, are you?" If I was a militia group or a right-wing militia group, yeah, they'd be all over me. But we're not. We have absolutely nothing to do with politics, and we are strictly defensive. We defend our property. We don't do border patrols or anything like that. If we did something like that, yeah, the government would be all over us. But we're strictly defensive, so no, they never bothered us. And we still have, the First Amendment is still enforced by the Supreme Court, so I still have freedom of speech. But without getting too technical on you, the Ninth Amendment, which protects our natural rights in the U.S., and the 10th Amendment, which absolutely limits the federal government to only doing those things specified, written out in the Constitution. Those amendments are both gone. They weren't repealed, but for all practical purposes, there is no more limit to government in the United States. The Supreme Court has stopped enforcing the Ninth and 10th Amendments. There's no limits to what the government can do. And as a result, all the career politicians do is pander for votes by, hey, let me give you money. There's a pandemic coming. Let me give you $5,000. Let me give you this. Let me give you that. Because they're more effective buying votes for that than they are, hey, let me stockpile some food for you in case there's a collapse. Or, hey, let me raise your electric rates and harden the electric grid. They won't vote for that. They should if they're trying to do the good thing for us and keep us alive, but all they do is buy votes. The most important thing the United States needs is term limits to get rid of career politicians. But there's other problems too. We've got to have a Supreme Court that will enforce the Ninth and 10th Amendments and limited government. And if we had government limited, we, number one, wouldn't have this great political divide. I mean, do we fight? Are we divided in the US over foreign policy, our military spending? No, we're divided over abortion, all kinds of social and economic issues that the federal government has absolutely no business being involved in. The 10th Amendment says they can't. So the country could be improved by not spending most of the money the federal government spends on is unconstitutional. You don't have a right under the Constitution to do a health care program. It's not in the Constitution. So if they followed the budget, followed the Constitution, we wouldn't have, the economic disaster with debt and a recession that we're going to have. And then we'd have government that focuses on what they're supposed to focus on, which is protecting me against threats I can't handle on my own. That's what government's supposed to do. And our government doesn't do much of that because they're too busy buying votes with social programs and pandering. And the Ninth and 10th Amendments are gone because the Supreme Court doesn't enforce them. So government can do anything they want to do, and that's what they've been doing. And that's why we're set up for a disaster, and most Americans won't survive a bad collapse.
So, in terms of government expropriation and excessive rule of law, what is Fortitude Ranch approach to that particular problem? Because, that, in my opinion, is one of the biggest things I'm worried about is the government overreach in these situations. Have you thought or war gamed at all with respect to how you're going to navigate a overreaching bureaucracy when the time comes? Because I think, especially as a community, of course, you'll be in the crosshairs. A famous scene from the movie Homestead is when the politician comes knocking and says, "Hey, you have stuff, and I've heard, and by decree of whatever, we get to confiscate this stuff, and we need to distribute this to other people." What is your approach to this, given that it's one of the things that is top of mind for a lot of your members?
We talked about it a little bit before. So in terms of political agendas, Fortitude Ranch doesn't have one. I'm speaking on my own. But when if government officials do come to try to seize our food, I said earlier, I don't think that's likely because they'd have to have the National Guard behind them. And even police wouldn't back that because, again, police, guard, they're local people, and that's by design. We've always wanted to have a strong National Guard, not a federal military, to avoid having things like the military being used against citizens. So I think they would refuse the orders. But if you're right and they follow the orders, it's going to be up to ranch managers, and ranch managers will decide based on our training and what I know about our ranch managers, they would refuse. I'm pretty sure they would refuse. I would, because if I give you my food, I'd rather die in a gunfight than die by starvation. I'm not going to surrender my food. I would say no. I'd say we're going to fight for it. Refuse to give you food. We're going to, it's different. And it depends on the situation. So let's say, hey, we got an army unit here, a guard unit here. They're fighting marauders. They need food. I would give them food. So it depends on the scenario. But if it's, hey, we're running out of food for our top state leaders and the legislature, they need more food, I would say, well, have them go out and start gardening like we do. We're not going to give away our food. So it'd be up to the ranch manager in this situation. But I would say no. If we're in a bad situation, bad enough that the government officials are low on food and the National Guard is willing to go out and kill and harass civilians to steal their food, then it's going to be such a bad situation. My bet is the ranch manager would say, no, we refuse, we'll fight. Now we might ask for a vote of our members to see what they want to do in a situation like that, but my bet is there'd be agreement to fight. And if it comes down to that, I don't think they would attack us. Now, if they got a tank, yeah, they can break through our walls, but we can go underground too. So you're eventually going to have people on foot, and you'd suffer a lot of casualties. The advantage of defending against prepared defenses is at least 3-1. It's up to a 10-1 advantage. We would have that advantage, and it's our terrain. And inside the walls, you don't know what we've got inside our walls. So we would probably choose to defend.
Well, I think you also brought up something interesting about the importance of the locality of it all and knowing people within the community who would potentially be more inclined to resist orders, presuming that those people were taken care of. Because if I'm a guy who's in with the town sheriff or whatever, and you see, your own family starving, and there's this group up on the hill that has all this stuff and all these provisions, you might know him because you went to high school with him. In fact, now that I recall this, there was a scene in the movie Civil War. Did you see that one?
No, it was such a stupid scenario. California and Texas are allies fighting the federal government. California might fight Texas. They're not.
Well, I think they did.
I didn't watch it.
They did that because he didn't want to be accused of politicizing it, right? Yeah. So that's why Alex Garland made California and Texas unify in that particular movie to prevent any criticism that he was favoring one side or the other. But anyways, there was a scene in that movie where it was right near the beginning where a guy is talking about how they had to hang some people because they were stealing stuff, but that they went to high school with that person. So kind of showing and I'm not saying that that's necessarily how it's going to play out. I guess it just means that in desperate times. So I agree. There's a lot to what you're saying in terms of being in with this community, knowing the people who are local, who are the ones who are likely going to be enforcing this, and also the factor of, they have to bring in National Guard, so that there's that disconnect there, so they would have less problem enforcing it. I think that's a very good point. But Yeah, I think, I don't know, when people get desperate, like I'm a bit more of a pessimist in terms of, what people and the depths people will go to. I think generally speaking, if you can take care of those people and if you can make provisions and maybe offer them a better deal even, these are things to think about. But maybe that's getting too elaborate in our speculations. I don't know.
Well, one thing about the National Guard and police as well is you're not going to have many of them because what's your priority? It's keeping yourself and your family alive. So
Yep.
policemen, a lot of them are going to quit because they're going to say, hey, law and order is gone. There's no way in hell I can get it back. And my family is at risk. If I go out and do my patrol and my duty, my family could get attacked by marauders. So a lot of policemen are going to quit. And it's going to be the same way with the National Guard. A lot of National Guard are troops that say, I joined the National Guard, and I was in the National Guard. I joined the National Guard to defend my family from overseas threats. So I'll deploy, fight overseas to defend my family at home. But my family at home is safe. Well, in a collapse, my family at home is not safe.
Yeah.
So a lot of National Guard people are going to say, no, I'm not reporting duty. I'm going to stay home to protect my family. And even amongst the federal military, you'll run into some of that as well. You'll have a lot of desertions from the federal military. People say, I realize we really need to keep Langley Air Force Base operating, but, my family could be killed by marauders. I'm out of here. So you're not going to have, I think the threat of the National Guard and police and stuff coming after you to steal your food, I think it's just, there's so many reasons I see that not happening. I don't think it's very likely, but it's legal. Our government authorizes it. That's what bothers me the most.
And just to reiterate, so we're clear, in Canada, we'll have far less rights than you guys down there. So it's not going to be a pretty picture up here. Do you have any other, before we conclude, just general advice to people who, maybe they're not wanting to become a member of Fortitude Ranch? Is there something you would generally advise for people to be doing at this point in time towards getting more prepared for what might be coming?
Absolutely. Any preparations you can do are great. Education is great. So the fact that they're watching your show is a good sign. Keep watching. There's a lot to learn, as you well know. And, get prepared. The Collapse Survivor app will give you a lot of education too. And it gives you the threat warnings. You can play simulations to learn more. So it's education, but it's also weapons. That's the other problem with government is, all the gun control stuff. We should be encouraging ARs. Do you need military capable weapons in a collapse? Hell, yes, you do. You got a Marauder group? What am I going to do? I love double-barreled shotguns. Well, that's great. If there's a Marauder group of 25 people coming in and I got 2 shots and I need to reload, that's not good. I need clips. I need high-capacity magazines. Sorry, not clips, magazines, which I can't buy legally in the state of Colorado. So you need to get prepared. And the biggest barrier you're going to have getting prepared is the government and regulators and all the crap they put in your way.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's great. And where can people find more information about you?
FortuneRanch.com. If you Google us, we're all over the place. You mentioned Fox. We've been on a lot of stuff. Not as popular as Canadian Prepper, but we're hoping our YouTube channel will eventually come close to you.
Well, popularity isn't everything. I'm still learning a lot in this space. And,
oh, yeah.
People like yourself have a lot to teach people like myself. And I know you do a lot of podcasts on other channels, so I'm sure we'll see more of you. And to encourage people, if they want to know more, go check out Fortitude Ranch. And thanks for coming out today. I greatly appreciate it.
It'd be great to come on again sometime.
Absolutely. All right. Take care.
Thanks.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.